It's August 4th and 6th, 2018. Two ordinary evenings on the roads outside Foggia, Puglia. In those 2 days, 16 sub-Saharan African farm workers lose their lives in 2 separate crashes. They had spent the whole day out in the fields, picking industrial tomatoes under a really harsh sun. After that, they were just trying to get back to where they were staying, though calling it home is a stretch. Most of them lived in overcrowded shacks in rural ghettos. They were being driven in old, worn-out vans by middlemen known as Caporali. These guys run illegal labor networks, packing as many workers as possible into unsafe vehicles. In one of the crashes, a van slammed straight into a 30-ton truck. What's on the truck? The same tomatoes the workers had just spent hours harvesting. The aftermath is shocking. Images spread quickly online, showing a mix of blood, twisted metal, and crushed tomatoes all over the road. Not long after, Italy's interior minister at the time, Matteo Salvini, speaks publicly. He says that only a small part of the agricultural sector is controlled by mafia groups, and that most farmers are operating fairly and within the law. But that raises a bigger question. What if that version of the story isn't quite right? What if these Caporali aren't just a small, isolated problem, but actually a key part of how the whole system works? This is where things get uncomfortable, because once you start looking closer, you begin to see that this system of labor brokerage, what's called Caporalato, is deeply embedded. It's not just a side issue. It helps keep Italy's massive canned tomato industry running. So what we're doing here is taking a closer look at how all of this really works, where it comes from, how it operates day to day, and what it costs the people caught up in it. And also why it hasn't gone away, even after years of laws meant to stop exploitation. By the end, the idea is simple. If you want to get rid of this system, it's not enough to just crack down on a few individuals. You'd have to rethink the whole structure behind how food is produced and sold. So yeah, stick with this. It's a story worth understanding. The story doesn't really start in 2018. It actually goes way back to the late 1800s. Back then in southern Italy, there were these huge farms, and landowners needed a lot of people to come in and work during harvest time. So they relied on middlemen called caporali, basically gangmasters. These guys would find workers, bring them to the farms, arrange where they stayed, keep them in line, and take a cut from their already low wages. For years, farm worker unions fought hard against this system. In 1919, the government even made the caporal role illegal. Later on, in the 1970s, things improved a bit. Public employment offices, working with unions, started handling recruitment instead. But then the 1990s came along and things shifted again. The government pulled back from those public systems. Private temp agencies were allowed, but they were supposed to be tightly controlled. In reality, that left a gap, and the old Caporale system quietly slipped back in. By the 80s and 90s, more and more of the farm labor force was made up of migrants instead of local Italian workers. And with that, the Caporali became closely tied to really harsh working conditions. Crammed transport, being paid by how much you pick, poor living situations, and workers depending entirely on these middlemen. Every time the government tried to crack down on it, the system just adapted. There were big moments, like a major worker protest in 2011 and a law in 2016 that made both the middlemen and the companies using them illegal. But instead of disappearing, the system just changed shape. It went more hidden, or turned into this gray area where hours aren't fully reported. Contracts are vague or fake, and a lot of the real costs get pushed onto the workers themselves. So this isn't really about the state failing to fix the problem. It's more about the state stepping back in a way that allows this kind of flexible, easily replaceable labor system to keep going, while still looking like it's being regulated. If you really want to understand why Caporalato is still around, you have to step back a bit and look at the bigger picture. Since the 1980s, a small number of huge supermarket chains have gained a lot of control. They basically set the rules. How much things should cost, how much farmers should produce, what quality is acceptable, and even how quickly everything has to be delivered. In southern Italy, this created a tough situation. Farms got bigger, but profits got tighter. To cope, there was more pressure to cut costs, especially on labor. Family farms mostly stayed within the formal system, but migrant workers ended up stuck in unstable, low-paid conditions. That's where Caporalato comes in. It's not just about illegal middlemen. It's more like a whole system. These brokers, called Caporali, don't just find workers. They organize almost everything. They can bring in large numbers of workers on very short notice. They arrange transport, places to stay, food, water, even small loans. Things that employers or the state don't provide. But there's a catch. In return, they control the workers tightly. Pay is often based on how much you pick, and there's pressure and exploitation built into the system. Some researchers describe this as a kind of migrant labor infrastructure. Basically, the system depends on migrant communities covering their own basic needs, instead of these costs being handled by employers or public services. So, when you see a can of tomatoes selling cheaply in a supermarket, say €1.29, part of that low price comes from the hidden reality that workers are covering those costs themselves, often in very harsh living conditions. The Caporale sits right in the middle of all this. He connects the farms and the workers, but also keeps a distance between them. That gap is where he makes his money. He doesn't fix the problem. He just keeps things running as they are. If you're getting something out of this, make sure you've hit the subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next. We're following how food and agriculture really work behind the scenes, and there's more to unpack. In the next part, we'll take you right into the fields and the makeshift settlements in Borgo San Nicola. That's a made-up name for a small town on the border of Puglia and Basilicata, where a lot of Europe's tomatoes come from. You'll hear directly from the workers, listen to their stories, and get a clear picture of how things actually run there every single day. Every summer, you'll see around 1,000 to 1,500 workers, mostly from Burkina Faso, showing up in the plains near Borgo San Nicola. People often call them seasonal workers, but that's not really the full story. These workers move all year round, following the crops, tomatoes, then citrus, then grapes, olives, strawberries. It's more like a continuous cycle than a temporary job. Where they stay isn't what most people would expect. They live in these makeshift settlements, often called ghettos. There's usually no running water, no proper toilets, no electricity, and no public transport. And it's not just random or accidental. It's set up in a way that keeps groups separated and easier to control for work. The pay depends on how much you can harvest. For example, filling a 300-kilogram crate earns about €3 to €4. If you're really fast, You might fill 30 in a day and take home somewhere between 80 euros and 100 euros after deductions for transport and the middleman's cut. But if you're slower, you could end up with just 20 euros or 25 euros for the same long day. So it becomes very competitive, almost like survival of the fittest out in the fields. The middleman, often called a caporale, controls almost everything. He organizes transport to the fields, provides water and food, sometimes even a place to sleep, and keeps an eye out for trouble. But all of that comes with a price: complete loyalty. If you fall out with him, you're basically shut out. No job, no ride, nowhere to stay. One worker, a 26-year-old man from Burkina Faso, shared his experience with researchers back in 2017. He said he once threatened a caporale who didn't pay him properly. After that, things changed. No one wanted to hire him anymore. So it's not exactly slavery in the traditional sense. People aren't owned outright. But the system is set up in a way that keeps them stuck. Working hard, earning little, and staying outside things like legal protections, social support, or any real chance to organize for better conditions. Then everything shifted with what people started calling the Mediterranean refugee crisis. After the 2011 NATO intervention in Libya, and with operations like Mare Nostrum and Frontex in place, a lot more people began crossing the sea, especially young men from different parts of Africa. When they got to Italy, the system didn't really know what to do with them. Many were given temporary humanitarian permits, but those would expire and leave them stuck in uncertainty. Reception centers were already overcrowded, running well beyond capacity, and more asylum applications were being rejected. So what you had was a growing number of people who technically had documents, but no real place to go and no clear path forward. In the tomato-growing areas, this translated into a sudden increase in available labor. People who needed work, any work. In places like Borgo San Nicola, authorities stepped in around 2014, saying they wanted to fix the situation. The Regional Migration Task Force came in with a plan to shut down the ghettos and crack down on the Caporalato System. They carried out inspections, tax checks, and evictions. Old farmhouses where workers stayed were torn down, but the alternatives they offered didn't really work. Temporary Red Cross camps were set up late. There was no proper transport to get people to work, and conditions there felt restrictive, like people were just being contained rather than helped. In the end, things didn't improve the way officials had promised. Instead of many small, scattered ghettos, everything got pushed into just a few tightly controlled areas. And rather than weakening the system, power ended up concentrating in the hands of a small group of caporali, mostly Italian, who worked closely with local farmers. So instead of dismantling the system, the policies ended up reshaping it and in some ways making it more organized and harder to escape. Even with 2 anti-Caporalato laws in place, lots of police crackdowns and politicians talking about it all the time, the system is still there. So what's going on? Basically, it works because it shifts most of the real costs onto someone else. Farmers and food companies only pay workers for the hours they actually spend in the fields. Things like housing, healthcare, and basic support, the state barely covers that. Instead, those costs get pushed onto the caporali, the middlemen, and often onto the migrant workers and their own communities. What you end up with is a strange situation where workers are essential to the whole production process, but at the same time, they're kept on the outside of society. They're there to work, but not really to belong. They stay separated, treated differently, and largely ignored in political discussions. And this isn't just happening in Italy. You see the same pattern in places like southern Spain, Greece, and parts of Turkey. The bigger system depends on having a workforce that's cheap, flexible, and easy to move around. And current migration policies in Europe end up providing exactly that kind of workforce. People who are constantly in an uncertain position without stable rights or protections. So, what have we actually learned from all this? Well, a few things really stand out once you look at the bigger picture. First, what we often call crime is actually part of how the system works. The Caporali isn't just some leftover mafia figure. He's basically the middleman keeping the whole agricultural machine running. Second, when the state seems to step back, that's not always a failure. A lot of these anti-slavery laws and task forces didn't really stop exploitation. They just reshaped it, made it more organized, even more efficient in some ways. Third, the power supermarkets have really matters. When they push suppliers to lower prices, that pressure doesn't just disappear. It moves down the chain, and it usually ends up affecting the workers in the fields, especially migrant laborers. Then there's migration policy. The way borders and permits are set up often leaves workers in a very fragile position, unsure, isolated, and with very few options. And that actually benefits the system because it keeps labor cheap and replaceable. Also, those informal settlements, the ghettos, they're not just random or accidental. They serve a purpose. They keep workers separated, easier to control and out of sight. And finally, a lot of the work that keeps these workers going, things like food, shelter, basic care, happens in the background, unpaid or underpaid. But it still supports the whole system. It's like an invisible subsidy that no one really talks about. When you put all this together, it becomes pretty clear. The Caporali won't just disappear on their own. They exist because the system needs them. So unless that system changes, not much else will. If this gave you a new way of looking at the food on your plate, you might want to stick around. In the next video, we'll look at how similar patterns show up in the global palm oil industry and what people are doing to push back. You can also check out the other videos on the channel if you're interested in how food and agriculture really work behind the scenes. And I'm curious, what part of this surprised you the most? And what should we dig into next? Thanks for watching. Because yeah, even something as simple as a tomato has a whole story behind it. Now you know a bit more of that story.